Hey Acers, and welcome to this week's edition of Ace Role Playing Games. I'm Mason Emerson, I'm the host, and it's good to have you here with me. This is the official channel for the Ace Role Playing Games Clubs, where our clubs can all communicate about things that they are officially doing. And if you have a video about putting together your club or any questions that you might have, let's communicate, and I will be glad to let you send me a video and I will post it up here for you. So let's let's get more than just my silly face looking at you. That said, I am going to, of course, remind everyone that we are gaming for good here, because that we want to bring more good into this world, and sometimes good comes in the form of just having a little bit of fun. With that, let's jump into this week's edition of Simply GM. This is technically the second if you want to put them in playlist order, and I'll put 0 in its place at the top. But with game mastering, which is what I'm trying to teach you how to do here, you're going to need, if you're running Savage Worlds, you're going to need to sometimes do a roll for a group of extras. So remember last time we talked about how, one, most player characters, well, all player characters are wild cards. And sometimes NPCs are wild cards. Those are the two kind that they do not only roll a d6. Well, I can get that straight up. Hey, a d6. Oh, it was right up. Okay, there we go. But they also roll a second d6 because that's the wild die. But extras, and it sounds like, and it was what it sounds like if they were an extra in a movie, they're going to be that person who really doesn't get a name. I mean, you can name them if you want to, but they don't technically have a name because they're going to die in the first combat, and they only roll a single die of their appropriate skill type. So you can have an extra who has a D8 in shooting, and extras with a D8 in shooting are still dangerous to the players' characters. So don't let them think that just a D8 in shooting is anything to be worried to not be worried about. So that's the first thing about extras. Second, if you have a group of extras, say a group of soldiers that are trying to sneak up on the heroes, instead of me rolling 8d6s for their stealth, I'm going to roll a d6 and a wild die. And that, if I succeed, which I got a 5, now that's the target number for all of our characters who have notices to be able to make it through for the group of 8 soldiers to make it through the notice of a player character, or maybe it's just an extra who's sitting there watching it. So the extras watching this entrance, they're trying to sneak past. This is a extra controlled by a player character because they're an allied extra. So they roll, and they rolled a 4. So that wouldn't notice. So this is where a success and determining success is where we begin to talk about one of the next things that we're going to talk about. So, and that is Bennies. Usually poker chips, because this is still hailing back to its original system, which was Deadlands. And Deadlands used poker chips. Of course, it used poker chips of different colors to represent different things, because he was just kind of going off some poker chips that were commonly available. And, it's not a bad setup. However, you can do poker chips. If you're doing Scooby-Doo, maybe do little gummy, fruity Scooby snacks. If you're doing Deadlands, maybe you do use bullet casings or poker chips. Or if you're doing, whatever. One of the fun parts about being a Savage Worlds game master is Bennies. Bennies can make it so much fun just for you, because then you can completely I mean, you can customize them and all sorts of things like that. You can get bennies for a good price on any sort of online shop or whatever. Now, this is the now let me explain what a Benny is and what it does. A Benny is well, um, well, first of all, it's kind of if you're familiar with D&D, it's like an advantage die. Only it isn't because it lets you re-roll any roll that you didn't like that isn't a critical failure. So if you if I'm trying to get something and I roll say a 3 and a 1. Say I rolled a 3 and a 1 on my stealth roll and I got it cuz I got to sneak past these soldiers. So I rolled a 3 and a 1. And so that is not a success. So what I would do is I would spend a Benny and I'd roll this again. And this time I got a 4. So at least I got a basic success. However, I don't know that that's going to be good enough as it is an opposed roll. So I'm going to spend another Benny and roll it again. Okay, I got a 6 on my wild die. I'm going to roll it again. I got another 6 on my wild die. I'm going to roll it again. Okay, and I got a 1. So I got a 13. Now that I'm trying to sneak past those 8 soldiers. And so we're going to let them roll a wild set and see if any of them can beat a 13. Oh, there's a 6. Ho. This is getting hairy now. Oh, but it's a 3 on the next one. So it's a 9. My 13 beats their 9. And it beats it by a raise. So, as a game master, if my player beats it by a raise, I would give them some sort of an extra benefit. Like they completely sneak past. They are able to steal some guns from the soldiers. I'd say, you beat it by a raise. What do you think would be something cool that could happen here? Or maybe I would say, you beat it by a raise, have a Benny back. Every player, unless they have a hindrance that reduces, or which is bad luck, or an edge that increases, which is luck, every player starts with 3 bennies. And we as game masters use these as dog treats. Okay, our players aren't dogs, and that's but that's the same purpose. If a player does something at the table that we want to encourage them to keep doing, give them a Benny. If a player does something at the table that we don't want them to do, don't give them a Benny. If they role play their hindrances or do a good role playing moment, give them a Benny. If they do something stupidly heroic, give them a Benny. There's lots of things you can reward bennies for, and you can give them all sorts of benefits for playing that Benny. That's what Benny is short for. It's an American slang term for benefit. So it's a Benny. Now, I'll get to this in a second, but when you play an action card, when you're dealing action cards, if one of the players gets a joker, everybody on that team gets a Benny. And we'll talk about the other effects of the card deck in a little bit. Maybe not this episode, maybe another episode. But here's the thing. You also get 1 Benny for each player character in the session. So if you have 5 players sitting at the table, you start with 5 bennies. But these bennies are meant to be used not only for your they can be used for your wild cards, but they can be used for any of your characters, any of your roles. You can use a Benny for the same purposes. And we'll get to the whole list of what you can do with bennies here in a second. But You don't get bennies. You don't get to reward yourself with bennies. You don't get bennies the same way the players get them. The only time you get more bennies is when you get a joker drawn for one of your side. Now, one more side note. When you're playing a wildcard character, you also get 2 bennies for that wildcard NPC. If you're playing the big bad guy, they get 2 of their own. You can use all of your bennies. If you have 5 players, you have those 5 bennies and the 2 for the wild card. So you have 7. But you also got to use that to re-roll, like when the mooks roll a pair of 2s or a 2 and a 1, and it's just a nasty roll, and you got to use your bennies for that too. And so don't be surprised if every time you start using your bennies, your players start cheering, because that's one less re-roll you get. So let's talk for a second about what you can do with the Benny. You can, like I said, you can re-roll a trait. I roll something not acceptable. I don't roll a single 4 on my wild die or my trait die. I can re-roll that. Anything except a critical failure, which, if you remember from last time, a critical failure is when you roll double 1s. When you roll double 1s, there you go. That is a critical failure, and it cannot be bennied out of. But that's where you get to be really creative as a narrator, and you get to narrate. Well, I should say your players get to be the creative as narrators, and they get to narrate what happens to them on the creative failure or the critical failure. And because here's the other thing: when it comes to critical failures, let them tell you how it failed, because the players are meaner to their characters than you could be. I mean, if they critical fail on a shooting roll, you can be like, "Oh, your gun jammed. It's going to take you around to clear the jam." But they might say, "My gun blew up, and now I got to find something else to fight with." And it just made the fight more interesting. And I'll get to something about interesting fights here in a second, because there was a video game thing that happened to me and my friend, and it actually makes for a really interesting fight. So I'll get to that in a second. I'm talking bennies still. Another use for a benny is to recover from shaken. Now, if you remember as well, shaken is that state that is between the exact toughness and 3 over it. So if the toughness is 5, so 5, 6, 7, 8, that's a result that will give you shaken when the damage is 8. But when it hits 9, it's shaken with a wound. Now, there are other attacks, not physical attacks, that can shake your character, like fear attacks and stuff like that. Now, if you have been physically shaken and you take another shaken result from a physical attack, then your character will take a point of damage and be shaken. However, if you are shaken either from a physical or non-physical source, and you take a non-physical shaken result, then that does not damage your character. So, or your player's characters, I should say. That's really what we need to be looking at. So, when you have a shaken character, and these can be your NPCs as well, when they are shaken, a Benny will recover from shaken. So, if my NPC went at the top of the round, I had that ace, and I rolled, and I did a bit of damage, but I'm done with my turn for the round. And now one of the players goes and they hit my NPC and shake them. I'm going to spend a Benny from my GM stack to unshake that character, so that way they can be shaken again if they take another hit. Whereas if they took another hit and got another shaken result, that would be a wound, and then knock them out of the fight. Because a wound takes an extra out of the fight. One wound will take an extra out of the fight. However, a shaken result will not. And everybody gets to roll a spirit to unshake. So that's a free thing to do. And if you fail on, if say I went at the last of the round, and I have a character who went the last in the round, or next to last in the round, got shaken by the last person, I I get to go first on the next round, then that character will then I will get to roll my spirit to recover from that. Vigor is soaking damage. Spirit is soaking or is unshaking. But say I am shaken. I have my dice. I roll and I roll a 2 and a 1 on that roll. I could spend a Benny technically to try and re-roll that. However, just spending the Benny unshakes me. So the next thing you use Benny for, and I just mentioned that just a second ago, is a soak roll. A soak roll works like this. I got shaken in a wound. I'm going to spend a Benny, and I'm going to roll my vigor. And for each success, in this case it's a 4. For each success, I soak 1 wound. So if I take 3 wounds, and I only rolled that 3 and that 4, I would only soak 1 wound, and I'd still be stuck with 2 wounds. So I'd spend a second Benny, and I would try it again. This is my vigor's a D6. Oh, look at that! Pair of 6s, double acing. So a 9. So now I'm soaking 2 wounds because I got a 9. That's the 4 is the first success, and the 8's the second success. But the other one, and this is the worst. This is the worst thing about, and I don't know what it is, but there's some sort of, it feels like a curse. I mean, admittedly, I don't believe in true dice luck. I believe that dice are weighted and they are designed to be random. But the randomness at which you'll roll a 6 on a d6 and then you'll roll a 1 the next time around, the randomness really could lead one to believe in dice luck. So maybe sometimes you're just not rolling the dice right that night, so switch your dice set. Anyway, so that's another use for a Benny, though, is soaking. Soaking is like that guy who gets the bullet through his shoulder, and he's like, ah, but then he just slaps his hand on it and moves his shoulder around, and then he gets right back in the fight, and it doesn't seem to affect him. That's soaking. And soaking is because Savage Worlds is cinematic, soak. Use your bennies. You can use a Benny to draw a new action card. And we'll get to action cards here in a little bit. We'll probably actually focus the whole next episode on that. So you can use a Benny to reroll damage. And remember, if you roll 2 1s in your damage, say I'm shooting a gun and I barely made my success, and I roll the pair of 1s, that is not a critical failure because it's just damage. So that would only be 2 damage. So I really definitely want to reroll that. And hey, 7 damage is better than 2. So anyway, so you can re-roll damage. You can also, if you're playing in a game where you have arcane background and you have power points that you have to worry about, and you need some more power points, you can spend a Benny to get 5 power points back faster than just waiting an hour to get 5 back. And you can use it to influence the story. You hand it to the game master and say, and basically say, okay, my favorite example of a Benny is that classic moment when you're in a game and you need to have a 50-foot length of rope to get 25 feet down the cliff so that you can get into the cave so you can look for the treasure. But nobody wrote rope on their character sheet, and the game master's playing a little more solid with the gear rules and says, you don't have rope on your character sheet. You can say, may I please? And by doing that, you have influenced the game. Or, I mean, it can be something mundane, but it'll be some sort of a needed item. Now, on page 90, there's there is a good bit of advice in the core book on how to award bennies, and it's it's pretty good and solid. But also realize that Benny flow is going to the flow of bennies is going to influence how um, it can influence the tension at the table. Now, if you got somebody who's hoarding bennies, because you will, you'll get one of those players who doesn't quite understand how the benny works, and they'll just have a stack that keeps growing and growing and growing. That's the point where you start putting them, you don't give them any more first. And then you start putting them in a situation where you're, where they're going to have to spend their bennies. Put them in a combat situation where they're getting smoked, or just keep putting them into situations where, you know, I don't know, maybe they're having great dice luck tonight. Again, I don't really believe in that, but maybe they're just rolling really well. And if they're if they're doing really well, maybe they won't need to use any of their bennies. So I mean, it's not a penalty if they don't use bennies, but you might want to cap them at around 5. You might want to say, hey, or, you know, and well, here, let me tell you the biggest key phrase that will get a Benny out of a player's hand that quick most of the time. And that is, okay, so I just did that damage roll of 7. So say I did a 7. You look at me and say, are you satisfied with that? And I say, no, I want to be able to actually wound them because they have 5. They have a 5 toughness. So I give you a Benny, and I'm going to roll it again. Oh, good. There's a 6. So that's 9 plus 3 more. That's 12. So I just rolled a 12. Now that's enough to actually get through their toughness and shake them and wound them. So those are some of the little tricks about working with bennies. Bennies are great when you have somebody who has the heroic feat and they say, there's a granny up there on the second floor of that burning apartment building. I'm going to rush up the stairs to save her. Give them a Benny. If they say, if their character's a thief and he's like, I'm going to use my I'm going to use my thievery skill and I'm going to steal an apple. You let him roll for it. See if the shopkeeper notices. And if they whether or not they succeed, give them a Benny for it. If they tell a joke that is germane and in character, give them a Benny for it. Just let them work their magic. Let them astound and play everybody. And here's another thing. Don't be the sole arbitrator. If the other players at the table say, you know what, this was a lot of fun. They made me laugh really hard. Or they did a really good job. I'd like just to, well, I'd like to have them get a Benny for that. Don't, first of all, maybe give the player who just nominated a Benny. That's a behavior you're after. Say, here's a Benny for you for suggesting it, and here's a Benny for you for the behavior you just did. There are so many things you can do. Again, Bennies get players to do the behaviors you want them to do at your table. If you don't want Monty Python jokes at your table or Monty Python references, then don't reward it when it happens. I say when because if you're a game master, just know this right now. There will be Monty Python and the Holy Grail references. It just happens. Now, I'll give a Benny, though, if they can actually reference Flying Circus, which is a little deeper in your Monty Python knowledge, or Life of Brian, or Meaning of Life, things like that. I I'll be a little more leeway-ish on that, but at the same time, you want you want to encourage the players to really play their characters. So encourage them, give them bennies, and let them spend those bennies. Put them in hard situations that makes them spend their bennies. And also, the flow of bennies can determine how a tone for the game. That's what I should say, is it determines a tone for the game. So you actually end up making a horror game more horrifying. They realize that those bennies haven't been coming that fast. But at the same time, you could make a horror game still work with lots of bennies. Just make, in your head, picture how cinematic it is. How much of a movie is this going on in your head? And adjust bennies accordingly. Again, these are just my suggestions, my thoughts, and just how things work. So, we're going to jump into combat next time and talk about action cards. And I'm going to also try and do like my friend Dom Zook did with his friends, and talk about how we can do Savage Worlds. I'm going to try and do some short Simply GM videos. So maybe these ones should be called um, the longer version or something. I don't know. But I am going to try and get up some shorts. So I'm going to break down these videos even more. But I want you guys' feedback. I want you guys to tell me, are these videos good? Are they helping you any? Are they giving you ideas? Let me know. Just put a comment in. And like I said, I try to get back to every comment that's given. And I'm glad to strike up a conversation there and find ways of getting you in communication with me. Otherwise, let's get you going. Let's get these clubs going. You guys are awesome. If nobody's told you this today, I love you. And I'm so grateful that you are here with me today. You're awesome. Your stories are awesome. And even if you feel like you're not doing it right, just doing something is right. So we are Ace Role Playing Games, and we're gaming for good.